Hey everybody, Tim Anderson here, aka Renfell. Welcome back to the latest episode of Mondays in Middle-earth as we continue our deep dive into The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, The Silmarillion, and beyond as we march towards the Rings of Power and the ridicule that is Amazon's crazy show. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome to the channel. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you get future updates. They go live every Monday at 11 a.m. Central Time. But of course, if you want to check out the rest of what we do here on YouTube, check out all the playlists. We have a gaming community that's currently playing Lord of the Rings online. We have a Discord. All that's down there. And I'm also a game developer working on The World of the Weave and the Void, which is a book series, a 5th edition tabletop game, and a point and click. All those good things. Yeah, so we'll talk about that more at the end of the video. So last week was our first episode, and we dove into The Hobbit. Right now, I am into the first few chapters of Lord of the Rings. Let me open up my Kindle here, and I'll actually tell you where I left off last night. We just got off to the point where Farmer Maggot put them in his wagon and basically is taking them down to the ferry. I'm at the point where it says it was 5 miles or more from Maggot's Lane to the ferry. So we're getting there. We're getting through the first few chapters. But I want to talk a little bit about some of what I've uncovered so far leading up to this point, some of the things that fascinate me, and hopefully you can't hear the dog barking in the background too much because my neighbor's dog is going crazy. In any case, one of the things that when I talked about this in the first episode about The Hobbit, I said that I read these books originally when I was 5 to 7 years old, and then annually up until the point I was in my early 20s. And this is before Google was really a thing. It was before the internet had exploded into what it is today. So the access to information was not what it is today. And so 20-year-old me didn't have the opportunity to deep dive and research all the stuff that 42-year-old me can. So some of this stuff is stuff that I just didn't know about back in the day, and now coming into it as an adult, there are things that I'm learning, but also things that I just forgot. So one of the things that I don't know if I actually knew this. I'm sure I had to have known it at some point in time, paying attention to the dates of publication and so on and so forth. But it was 17 years between the publication of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, unless my math is off, which it could be. Um, from what I was doing some reading on, it's basically it was 12 years to write and another 5 years to get things published. So during that time, World War II happened. Tolkien changed colleges where he was working. His kids grew up and moved out. He matured as a writer, as a lover of languages, and he had a lot, and I mean a lot of time to basically decide that he was going to retcon The Hobbit into this legendarium that he had been building and create this overarching story around the hobbits and everything else. So it's kind of fascinating to me to think about having that much time, 17 years, because I can tell you that from the point of view working on various projects over the years, I think the longest gestation period I've had for a project with someone else has been, I think, maybe 3 years. My own projects, the Saga Leucemia, I could sort of see being on a similar timeline because I started that in 1999 as a D&D campaign, then it became a play-by-post thing in the early 2000s, and then by 2008 I was writing short stories and everything else in that world, starting to write the novels, getting all the outlines out of the way, and then by 2014 it had spun out into an MMORPG, which was basically 15 years of time between that and then. So I kind of have some inkling of what went on in terms of world building, but I don't know why the my brain had forgotten that it took that much time between The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. So that part was very fascinating. And I think that's also one of the reasons why Middle Earth is what it is today as like the pinnacle of world building and fantasy that everyone likes to look at because no one had ever done anything like that up until then. And spending 17, well, realistically spending maybe 20 years actually, because if you think about it, he had started working in the Legendarium and the world long before he wrote The Hobbit. And then when he retconned it and everything else, we're talking about maybe 2 decades or more. I mean, we never know what ideas were, gestating and percolating up there and how long that that was up there jiggling around before it actually came out on paper. So that's something that fascinates me. Um, this also led to something which I think is a bit of an issue. Which if you read, I'm reading the version that I have on my Kindles an all-in-one, and it's got like the 50th anniversary edition notes in there, and there is a whole slew of stuff written about the basically from the time of publication up until the time of Tolkien's death, he was obsessed about the errors that were being found in all the different versions and publications, and you know, an an unauthorized copy starting to be sold in the United States, and just issues with words not being capitalized properly, and editors changing things like dwarfs to dwarfs, and so on and so forth, and him wanting to be very particular about things. I can't imagine being that level of obsessed in that time period because of how I mean it was literally something that he pursued until his death. Like he never got resolution on that. Like it was always every single new edition that came out had things that were errors, and it could take years to get those errors fixed, whereas today in the modern era we have everything on digital, so it's very easy to go in and fix mistakes and get everything up to a certain version, you know, version control for those of you who are familiar with that, that can be then sent out on a global scale to all publishers no matter where they live. So it's that part of it is somewhat sad to me because it feels to me like he didn't get a chance to really enjoy the fruits of his labor. And I could just be making this up. I just get that sort of feeling from what I've read now about the constant obsession with fixing all of these little things and the nagging feeling that's going on in the back of his mind about how that's not quite right. It's got to be fixed. I got to send mails. I got to send letters out to these guys again. Now I got to send it out to these publishers and so on and so forth. Um, Kind of a nightmare of a situation, but yeah. Now that we've got those two things out of the way, let's actually jump in and talk about going through the first few chapters of the book so far. There are some things that most of the stuff here is I'm remembering very well, the storyline and the books and everything else, and it's all going very well. One of the things I love is I don't think I've read the books since either just before or just after Peter Jackson's films came out. And so it's really interesting to me now as I'm going through and I'm finding lines of dialogue that are in the early chapters, and they're spliced into the three Peter Jackson films in different places. And I've talked about this before, like where we've got Faramir's speech to Eowyn when he sees her laying on the bed recuperating after the battle, and that line of dialogue gets put into Wormtongue's speech in Peter Jackson's Two Towers film, and it's given an entirely different meaning. And I think that was brilliantly done on Fran and Peter, and I forget the name of the other woman who worked on that with them, screenwriting. But I thought they did a very good job of pulling things out and mixing and matching those for a film adaptation. And seeing those in the book is it's very comforting, and also it's just kind of cool to see how you can take things like that and take lines of dialogue and spin it into scenes. It was really cool stuff. But going into one of the first things that made me laugh is because I recently read in I think it was in the I did a video on C.S. Lewis versus J.R. Tolkien from a world building perspective, and how Tolkien had sort of ridiculed Narnia in the beginning and kind of said that it's a hodgepodge of things, and it's got too much of the real world in it. And yet we have a reference when the fireworks are going off and the dragon comes overhead, and it says something along the lines of it moved with the speed of a freight train. And it made me laugh because I was like, that's literally one of the things he kind of accused C.S. Lewis of doing, was injecting, some real world stuff in there. And it was just a throwaway line that it's a very quick thing that just kind of made me chuckle and go, just in the scope of a fantastical work which has nothing to do with our own world, so to speak. Even though it technically kind of does in the grand scheme that's supposed to be many many years ago, the freight train reference gave me a bit of a chuckle. Um, Something that I had forgotten about, and this is probably my fault for just constantly thinking about the films from Peter Jackson as opposed to the books in terms of how I visualize the hobbits now. Frodo is 50 years old when Gandalf came back after the birthday party, and the birthday party happened when he was 33. So that's a 17-year gap. Right? Yeah, yeah, that's my math at work there. There's a 17-year gap between the birthday party when Bilbo disappears and Frodo getting the ring and then Gandalf going off. And it does say that there was a period of time when he was coming and going fairly frequently over the years until suddenly his visits ceased, and it had been 9 years when he finally returns and Frodo is 50 and he's basically, Gandalf shows him the ring and throws it in the fireplace and now we're finding out that I got to leave the Shire and everything else. He was 50 at that point and it had been 9 years since he had seen Gandalf. So 9 years of Gandalf going around and searching and I'm not intimately familiar on the timelines here, so people who are, feel free to drop your comments down below. But I'm assuming because this is the part where he's telling Frodo about, we tracked down Gollum and I went to Minas Tirith and I looked through the records and all these things happened during this 9 year period of time. That's a huge chunk of time. And I sort of had forgotten all about the fact that it had been 17 years between the birthday party and Frodo actually leaving the Shire, and 9 years where there was no contact with Gandalf whatsoever. Because it's not ever explained or even talked about that way in the films. And so my mind, for some reason, had sort of glossed over that fact. And going back and rereading, I'm like, okay, that's a huge chunk of time. Now I definitely want to know more about all the things that were going on during that time, which I'm sure are in various books and sundries somewhere that I just don't remember about. Probably the appendices and so on and so forth. So looking forward to digging into that information because that's a huge window during which Gandalf was, you know, excuse me, off doing other things. And then finally, one of the last things I want to talk about, because it happened just before I got to the point in the book where I am right now, because they got to Farmer Maggot's place, um, was they meet the High Elves on the road, and they have dinner with them, right? And there's this talk, and they meet them on the road, and they find out that the Black Riders are there, and the Elves are like, "You better come with us," and they have a big feast, and they all pass out, and etc. I, for some reason, and again, this might be because it's been so long since I've read the books, or it could also be the influence of Peter Jackson's films at play here. I don't remember elves being sort of the jolly gay, and I don't mean gay as in homosexual. I'm using the terminology from the books, the jolly gay, happy people that they are. The elves of Rivendell in The Hobbit, I understand it from that perspective because that was a children's book, and it was written very much as they were these always singing songs and making fun of the dwarves and everything else. But then we get to the Mirkwood elves, and the Mirkwood elves are not quite as cheerful as the Rivendell elves. And then as we're getting into this book, we're talking about we're meeting the High Elves, and they're very much jolly, happy. And the word is gay that he uses to describe them. Um, and that's very much like the Rivendell elves of The Hobbit. And when they meet Frodo on the road, if meet Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin, they are joking with the hobbits, and poking fun at them. And for some odd reason, I seem to remember the elves being much more solemn. But I'm wondering if maybe that's I haven't gotten there yet in the book, and it's been so long since I've read these books. So I'm wondering, is it not until after they get to Rivendell and there's the council? Is it not until after the council that the elves become serious because they realize the threat of what's going on? Or is it just that the elves outside of Lothlorien are the happy-go-lucky, cheerful elves? Because I very much remember, at least I think I remember, that the elves of Lothlorien under Galadriel are very much solemn, somber, you know, don't let anybody in. We're secret. We're hidden. We're protecting our borders. We're going to kill all the orcs that come into contact with us. Sauron is this ancient evil we've faced before. Galadriel is very much a solemn figure. of power. So I'm wondering if it's just my memory that's mistaken here, and I'm going to find out more as I dive into the book and continue reading, or is it just that I'm distorted by the version of elves from Peter Jackson's films? Because the high elves here are way more jolly and cheerful than I remember them being. At least the elves that they're meeting in the Shire on their way out. Just felt weird to me. Anyway, I'm in 15 minutes in, so that's enough for today's episode. I'm going to be continuing to read and analyzing every week the Fellowship of the Ring. I don't anticipate this being something that I'm going to read all at once. I'm going to try to read a few chapters per week. Try to have five, 4 to 6 points to talk about each week in these episodes. So hopefully you enjoy. Love to hear your thoughts down below. Don't forget we have a separate channel in our Discord server specifically spun up around the Mondays in Middle Earth show. So if you would like to have greater conversations beyond Discord, beyond YouTube, if you would like to have greater conversations beyond YouTube, don't forget to go to our Discord and check out that channel. Links to our Discord are down below. So yeah, comments below, like the video, subscribe. Hit the bell icon, all those good things. Share it out if you think this is something that your communities would enjoy, and I would appreciate that. And if you want to support the channel, there's a couple of ways you can do. So one is you just can subscribe as a member here on YouTube. I only have one tier of membership. There's some fun little perks with icons and chat stuff and everything else. Or you can head over to patreon.com/wandering hermits, with the wandering hermits being myself, my brother, and my wife, and we are building the world of the Weave and the Void, which is that map behind me. It is a 5th edition tabletop setting with the books due out in June of 2022, along with a book series like Dragonlance, with those chapters being published twice a month on Thursdays. And there's also a point and click game like King's Quest, which is set in the same world. You can download the free demo today over at the Patreon page. You can pre-order all the different items and support the channel that way. So hopefully we'll see you over on Patreon, in Discord, and hopefully here for the next episode as well. Thanks everybody. Happy reading. See you next time.